Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, breaking a week of silence, North Korea agrees to South Korea's proposal for working-level talks to arrange reunions this month for families separated since the Korean War. Financial regulators order a 3-month business suspension of 3 Korean credit card companies for causing the country's largest ever personal data leak. Plus, protesters in Thailand vow to topple Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat's government after they disrupted disputed general elections on Sunday. These stories and more coming up on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Bree, and we start with the highly anticipated response from North Korea about family reunions. Pyongyang has suggested the two Koreas meet for working-level talks this week to discuss the possible resumption of reunions for families separated since the Korean War.
And for more, let's connect live to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at the Unification Ministry here in Seoul. Hi, Sung-hee, what's the latest?
Hi, Yusan. North Korea sent a short message at around 10 a.m. this morning through the Inter-Korean hotline, saying that the two Koreas can meet for working-level talks on either this Wednesday or Thursday at the North Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom. South Korea's Unification Ministry welcomed the response, which comes roughly 8 days after its initial proposal, and said that it will decide on the date before the day is out after meeting with related ministries. Now, that means the two Koreas will be discussing the details for resuming the long-suspended reunions for families divided by the border, including the date and location of the event. South Korea has proposed holding the reunions from February 17th to the 22nd at North Korea's Mount Kumgang resort.
Yeah, so if the two Koreas meet for talks later this week, that leaves them less than 2 weeks until Seoul's proposed dates for the reunion. Is the 3rd week of February still a viable date?
Mark, now that question was asked here at the Unification Ministry just about an hour ago during a press briefing. While the Unification Ministry spokesperson Kim Il-do refrained from giving a clear yes or a no, he said that South Korea will try to hold the event as soon as possible, considering the urgency of the matter. North Korea may make a counter-proposal on the date of the reunion to hold it sometime after South Korea and the United States joint military drills, which will take place at the end of this month and run through April. Seoul and Washington say the annual drills involving thousands of troops are purely defensive in nature, but the North views it as a war game. Millions of Koreans were separated during the Korean War, and we must keep in mind that time is running out for the elderly family members to see their loved ones one last time. Guys?
All right, Sung-hee, thank you for that. That was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting on North Korea's response on South Korea's proposal for family reunions.
Now, moving on to the rest of the day's news. In the wake of South Korea's largest ever personal information leak, financial regulators have slapped 3-month business suspensions on 3 of the nation's leading credit card companies.
Now, this comes as the government takes more steps to better secure the public's personal and financial information. Our Connie Kim reports.
Korea's financial regulators are coming down hard on 3 credit card companies whose customer data was stolen in the largest personal information leak in the country's history. The Financial Services Commission and the Financial Supervisory Service will suspend the business operations of KB Kookmin Card, NH Nongyap Card, and Lotte Card for 3 months, starting February 17th. Under the terms of the suspension, the companies will be banned from taking on new customers, issuing card loans, or processing cash advances. Existing customers, however, will not be affected, as the suspension does not ban the firms from providing financial services to them. The suspension is the first in over 10 years when credit card companies indiscriminately issued credit cards that led to mounting individual debt. Last month's leak, which affected at least 20 million people, sparked concerns the data could have ended up in the hands of scammers. The estimated compensation for mental damage caused to customers by the data breach is expected to reach nearly $160 million. As another part of the punishment, the CEOs of the three firms are to face punishment depending on their accountability. With the public still up in arms over the leak, Prime Minister Chung On-won said Sunday that law enforcement authorities will begin an indefinite crackdown on those who illegally circulate or use leaked personal data. However, concern continues to rise as it turns out not only credit card holders' information could be at risk. Following an external audit, the Financial Supervisory Service confirmed Monday that the data of 51 customers of the Prudential Life Insurance Company of Korea has also been leaked. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Korea's debt-ridden public institutions have vowed to reduce their debts further by $37 billion by the year 2017. The Finance Ministry says 18 public entities, including the Korea Land and Housing Corporation and Korea Electric Power Corporation, plan to attract private capital and delay launching of several projects to slash their liabilities. Through the initiatives, the public firms would nearly double their previously pledged debt reduction and bring down their debt ratio by almost 20 percentage points. Some 40 public institutions also say they will reduce employee benefits by $150 million this year. Based on the finalized plan to be announced later this month, the government will assess the firm's progress in June and at the end of the third quarter. South Korea and the United States have signed a new agreement on sharing the costs of keeping U.S. troops on the Korean peninsula from 2014 to 2018. Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and U.S. Ambassador to Seoul Sung Kim signed the renewed special measures agreement on Sunday. The pact still needs to be approved by Korea's National Assembly, something that could prove difficult as lawmakers have criticized the sharp increase of the cost shouldered by Seoul. Under the new pact, South Korea will pay some $860 million, up nearly 6% from the previous year.
Now, as part of its nationalistic campaign, Japan is engaging in a meticulous scheme to stop the U.S. state of Virginia from using the Korean name East Sea as well as Japan's name Sea of Japan when referring to the body of water between Korea and Japan. While Tokyo has hired a lobbying firm to pile the pressure on Virginia, the bill, which requires school textbooks in the state to use both names, is inching closer to passing the state legislature. Yulian reports.
This is a service contract between McGuire Woods, one of the biggest lobbying firms in the United States, and the Japanese embassy in the U.S. The contract contains various ways to stop Virginia's General Assembly from passing a bill that would allow textbooks to note the Sea of Japan is also called East Sea. The bill, which was passed last Thursday, is important to the large Korean American community in Virginia, who see the current sole designation of the body of water between Korea and Japan as Sea of Japan as a painful relic of Japanese occupation back in the first half of the 20th century. The contract includes ways to explain why calling the body of water East Sea is wrong, and also plan to form protests against the Korean American community calling for the adoption of the new title. The contract also included ways to make the new governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, veto the bill if it did pass the full House. The documents actually revealed that Japan's ambassador Kenichiro Sasae had already sent a letter to McAuliffe in December, threatening that economic ties between Japan and Virginia will be damaged if the bill was enacted. It's highly unusual for a foreign embassy to be actively involved in a local state's legislation, so the findings are expected to cause quite a stir. Despite the Japanese embassy's efforts that cost them $75,000 over the span of 3 months, the bill was passed last week by a House Education Subcommittee, and it now heads to the full House Education Committee. Chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, Pat Mullen, says his party supports the bill, adding that all students in Virginia should have a thorough understanding of problems in the world. Yurian, Arirang News.
Now, in a move almost certain to further inflame tensions in Northeast Asia, a top Chinese military official says a Japanese fighter jet recently entered China's air defense identification zone. Citing an interview with Major General Lo Wian, the Oriental Daily News reported Sunday that a Japanese fighter entered China's defense zone last Friday, the first day of the Lunar New Year. Two Chinese fighters later drove the Japanese jet out of the zone. The military official said the move shows Japan's intention to create a problem and proves that it's Tokyo raising tensions in East Asia. He added Beijing's prompt announcement shows China is prepared for combat, even during the festive period.
Korea's National Assembly is set to open a month-long extraordinary session on this Monday, 4 months ahead of the first local elections under the Park Geun-hye administration. Things are hotting up, not only on the election front, but on the legislative front as well. Kim Hyun-ji has more.
The pre-registration of candidates for the June 4th local elections begins this Tuesday. And when the bell rings, the rival parties will start their 4-month-long race to the line. Preliminary candidate registration will continue until May 14th. And those who choose to register during this period are allowed to start campaigning ahead of the main candidate registration in mid-May. The June elections cover 17 provincial governor and mayoral seats, as well as education superintendents and local assembly members. The ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Democratic Party are quickening steps to name candidates for the nationwide polls, and they plan to finalize their nominations by April. Independent lawmaker An Chol-soo is also aiming to launch his own party by March and field candidates for all 17 provincial governor and mayoral seats. With the addition of An's party, the June local elections are expected to be a three-way race for the first time in 16 years. Ahead of the elections, the rival parties are expected to lock horns on a range of issues in parliament this month. Lawmakers will launch a probe into the massive personal data leak last month involving 3 credit card companies. But the rival parties are wide apart on how to handle the crisis. The ruling Saenuri Party is focusing on penalizing financial institutions by imposing fines on them if they are found to have leaked their customers' personal data. But the main opposition Democratic Party wants to adopt a compensation system, focusing more on having financial institutions pay for the damage incurred by data losses. The Democratic Party is also demanding Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok, as well as the heads of the nation's financial regulators, step down to take responsibility for the data leak. But the Saenuri Party says handling the crisis must be their top priority. The rival parties are also locking horns over the government's basic old age pension plan, with the opposition party adamant about sticking to President Park's original pledge to pay all senior citizens 200,000 won, or about $185 every month. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
The government has unveiled a second batch of tourism promotion measures, mainly focused on enhancing domestic tourism for Koreans. In a meeting presided over by President Park Geun-hye on Monday, the government laid out plans to establish so-called tourism weeks in spring and fall, 22 days in total, to spread the nation's tourism demand over the year, which currently peaks in the summer season. The Tourism Ministry and the Education Ministry are also considering closing elementary, middle, and high schools for short-term vacations over these periods. President Park called for policies in line with the public's rising standards and those that bring out the unique characteristics of each region.
More and more college-educated Koreans are neither working nor even looking for a job. Statistics Korea said Monday that the number of economically inactive people with at least a college degree was more than 3 million in 2013, which is a 3.2% increase from the year before. While just 10% of college-educated people were part of the economically inactive population 15 years ago, this figure rose to 15% in 2005 and to nearly 19% last year, meaning 2 out of 10 college graduates fit into this category. Meanwhile, the number of college-educated employees is also on the rise, a result of academic inflation in the country. The college entrance rate in Korea stands at over 70%. The oil spill that occurred last Friday off the coast of the southern port city of Yeosu is much bigger than previously reported. The head of the Yeosu Maritime Police Department, Kim Sang-bae, said at a press conference on this Monday that the amount of oil spilled was 164 tons, which is over 200 times greater than earlier estimates. Now, the spill occurred after a Singapore-registered tanker hit a landing bridge last Friday as it tried to dock at Nakpo Harbour, causing 3 oil pipelines to rupture. The pipelines are operated by GS Caltex, which provided the original spill estimates. The police chief added the tanker was going at about 13 kilometers per hour when it was approaching the port, more than 3 times faster than the 4 kilometers an hour recommended as safe.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Voting has ended in Thailand's general elections, but it seems the bitter political conflict and violent clashes on the streets will rumble on. Thailand's election watchdog says it's unable to announce the results after anti-government protesters forced the closure of hundreds of polling stations. Kim Min-ji has more.
Thailand's much-disputed national election closed Sunday, but hundreds of polling stations in Bangkok were shut as anti-government protesters blocked access to would-be voters. Local residents lodged complaints at police stations saying they were unable to cast their ballots.
I came to vote because I want to keep the right, and it all depends on me even I want to cast an abstention vote.
Voting was prevented in more than 430 of the capital's 6,600 polling stations, and there was no voting at all in at least 5 southern provinces. Voting elsewhere went smoothly. An anti-government protest leader said the government would not be able to declare a result due to the closures.
The elections could not be held nationwide. Therefore, the government will be unable to declare a result. The election is a waste of time and money.
After the polls closed, Thailand's election commission said nearly 90% of the country's 93,000 polling stations were able to open. Further voting has been set for February 23rd for those who were unable to cast their ballot during the advanced voting last week due to disruptions caused by anti-government protests. The protests flared up in November last year, with protesters demanding Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra resign, accusing her of being a puppet for her brother and exiled former leader Thaksin Shinawatra. They want an unelected People's Council that would oversee political reform. However, with the opposition boycotting the elections, Yingluck is expected to win comfortably. A mass protest is being called for Monday in Bangkok, further escalating tensions in the nation. At least 6 people were injured Saturday in gun battles between protesters and government supporters. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A court in Egypt has acquitted more than 60 supporters of former President Mohamed Morsi, who were arrested last year for holding violent protests. The men, most of whom have links to Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood, had stood accused of attempted murder and rioting following clashes in Cairo that left at least 7 people dead and more than 250 injured. They had been protesting against Morsi's ousting by the military in July of last year. Egypt's military-backed interim government declared the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group last year. The Ukrainian government has let an opposition activist leave the country for treatment after his abduction, torture, and then attempted arrest by police outraged the opposition of President Viktor Yanukovych. Dmitry Bulatov, who spoke about being crucified during more than a week in the hands of mysterious kidnappers, is heading to Lithuania, which has promised to treat any protesters injured in the crisis. President Yanukovych, facing mass protests that have prompted fears of civil war, has announced he will return to work on Monday after taking 4 days off on sick leave. Yanukovych's decision to accept the resignations last week of his prime minister and his cabinet has done little to placate demonstrators, many of whom want to see Ukraine forge closer ties with the EU rather than Russia.
Back here in Korea, the outbreak of bird flu in the country is making some people think twice before eating chicken or duck. But a national group of doctors says there's nothing to be worried about, and in a show of confidence, they tucked into some delicious duck meat at a restaurant in Seoul. Our Paulie reports.
Here in the city of Seoul, a local restaurant specializing in roasted duck is buzzing with business, despite the outbreak of avian influenza. But it hasn't scared off this special community of doctors who say they're eager to dig in. Organized by the Korean Academy of Family Doctors, some 100 health professionals have come out in a show of support to raise public awareness about food safety.
From the perspective of health professionals, there is no problem with eating chicken and duck affected by bird flu as long as it's cooked. We came here to demonstrate that.
According to relevant authorities, there have been no human cases of the H5N8 bird flu strain in Korea. However, doctors say such infections, if there were to be some, would be manageable.
Avian influenza, in terms of influenza strains, is not a serious disease. If by chance there is an infection, antiviral drugs and similar treatments would be more than sufficient to treat it.
In addition, experts say there is no evidence to suggest that eating cooked poultry can transmit the AI virus to humans. So don't worry, just cook thoroughly and eat up.
오리고기, 닭고기, 계란 익혀 드시면 아무 문제 없습니다.
Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Staying in Korea, and taxi rates in the Korean capital Seoul were raised last year in an attempt to boost the incomes of struggling drivers and to improve the overall experience for passengers. But both drivers and passengers are complaining that little has changed despite the fare hike. Song Ji-son reports.
Even after 4 months since taxi rates were raised, it's still difficult for many commuters to catch a cab at night here in Seoul.
Even after the fare hike, I spent 2 hours trying to hail a cab. In that time, I was turned down about 3 times, so it's quite frustrating.
About 4 or 5 taxis told me that they couldn't take me that way even though they were empty.
Taxi drivers say they're still being forced to turn down customers in order to earn a living wage. They say it's because taxi companies are requiring drivers to turn over more of their daily earnings, eating up any rise in income from the higher fares.
We should be getting paid 30,000 won, or about $30 more than before. But that's not the case. Drivers aren't able to be friendly to customers.
The local government had sought to address taxi complaints when approving the base rate hike, which would translate to a nearly 4% increase in daily average income. However, a majority of taxi companies have increased the amount that cab drivers need to turn over by about $24 on top of the previous $113 daily total.
We usually need to file 26 working days to earn a normal salary. Even though the fares have increased, making more than $130 is not very easy.
In response, taxi companies say they've increased the monthly salaries of taxi drivers to reflect the higher rates and fees. But drivers say that it's not enough, which will likely leave more customers waiting on the road even longer. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
OK, well, it's time to get a check now on the weather with our very nice weathercaster, Lee Ji-an, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Hello there, Ji-an.
Good afternoon, Mark and Yusan. Well, I hope both of you had a wonderful Lunar New Year holiday. Well, people in the southern provinces certainly had a good weather because yesterday, temperatures in some regions down south, like Hapcheon, got up to 24.4 degrees Celsius and Daegu got up to 20.4.
Well, it must have felt like spring down there.
Right. Exactly. And you know, I saw a few pictures that were taken in Daegu yesterday, and some people were taking wearing t-shirts. But you know, it's a totally different story today. The whole nation is having temperatures that are 7 to 8 degrees lower compared to yesterday, and wind chill is making it feel a lot colder, so be sure to bundle up tight. Still, we can expect mostly sunny skies nationwide throughout the day. Now, we have another cold snap on the way, and tomorrow morning, the capital will wake up to morning low of -10, and temperatures will remain on the minus side all day long for the central region. And it looks like temperature will remain freezing cold for the first half of the week, so please gear up with all your winter accessories and cover up to stay warm. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The afternoon high in Seoul will get up to -1. Daegu and Gwangju will see a high of 10 and 6, while Busan will top out at 14. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju will climb up to 8 in the afternoon, and Gyeongsang will be topping out at -1. Now that's all for me today, and back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there. Looks like we've got a few cold days in store, don't we? Well, those are stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I will be back tomorrow right here on NEWSLINE at noon. Join us then.